Good morning, guys. Welcome everyone to the second week of Southeast Asia Data Science Conference. Am I audible? Give me a quick VIC in the chat window if I'm audible. Yes. Yeah. Hello, guys. Are you guys enjoying the CCon conference? Yes. Fine. So the speaker for the today is Mr. Ankush Khandelwal. So before diving into the session, I would like to give a brief introduction about Mr. Ankush. So Mr. Ankush has a considerable expertise in data, like analyzing complicated, diverse, and fascinating data on a daily basis. He's currently working as a senior manager in product analytics at Grab, with a desire to inspire business to make better decision making, like quicker across levels and function. He has 10 plus years of exposure in data and product analytics. He also held positions at top IT firms like Apple and Flipkart as a senior product demand planner and a senior analyst. So apart from his enthusiastic work, he holds an MBA from a prestigious Indian School of Business. So join us today on this expedition of data science with Mr. Ankush and learn from him the product analytics and its growing importance. So Mr. Ankush, can you hear me?
Yeah. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah. Over to you. You can start sharing your screen if possible. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. So first of all, thanks for the organizing team for bringing me here. Super excited to have this sharing session with all of you. I can't see all the faces, but I'm assuming you guys are excited for this session, as am I. So before I begin, I think I just quickly wanted to cover what I thought is a relevant, way what we can discuss together. So think of it as a two-way session, right? I'm going to talk about a bit about my background, and then I just want to spend half an hour around talking about product analytics, and at least from my perspective, how is it different, the growing importance of it, and what are the key capabilities or skills for a successful career in this. And then we'll leave the last 25 minutes for any Q&A. Yeah. But in between, if there are any other topics, any other things you want me to cover, feel free to ping on the chat. I'll keep looking at the discussions there and try and answer any questions along the way. Yeah. Okay. So let me start with, and for this session, I think it's going to be more like I have some talking points. I don't have any fancy slides or any research here. I think I'm trying to keep it as candid and as open so that you get a real understanding of how product analytics or in general analytics / data science is evolving in the industry. Yeah. And let me start with a quick introduction about myself. So hey everyone, this is Ankush. I've been in the analytics field for last 10 plus years now. So I started my journey back in 2011 in Bangalore. And at that point, I joined this firm called Tesco. So for the folks who may not be aware, I think Tesco is like a retail giant equivalent of like Walmart in UK. So this was my first internship / analytics role there. And then quickly I moved to Flipkart. So this was in 2012. Flipkart was still a very small company at that point. And when I joined, I was really amazed. I think I joined in the analytics side, especially on the web analytics. And Flipkart was just launching their ebooks. So for folks who may not be familiar, I think at that point, Flipkart was trying to venture into going into ebooks similar to what Amazon at that point had built that muscle in the US. So I was part of that team and trying to understand how web analytics could be used to make better decisions then. Yeah. I think I did that for 1.5 years, and then I had a desire to study further. So I pursued an MBA from ISB. And then after that, I got an opportunity in Singapore with Apple. So I joined Apple as a more on the operations planning side. I think I spent in like close to 3.5 years in Apple in Singapore. And then after that, I joined Grab as an analytics manager. and I started building out a product analytics team for a couple of different domains. One of them was geo, and I still continue to lead that. And over the last, it's been 3.5 years with Grab now, and I've started from building some of the teams from scratch, and I'm now leading 3 different teams, close to 15 team members there. Yeah. So that's a very quick intro and background about me. If any of you have any of questions among these companies or anything, just ping me on the chat and we can discuss at the end. But throughout this last 10 to 12 years of my work right, I've been extremely lucky and extremely humbled to be able to work at these big brands. At the same time, be able to really understand the power of data and power of analytics, data science on influencing the decision making. One trend which I want to call it out here is the industry has changed a lot in last 10 to 12 years, right? So I still remember when I was at Flipkart, there were discussions around hiring the first data scientist, right? And there were a lot of discussions around what kind of problems the data scientists are going to solve. They were looking at a candidate who was extremely coming from an academic background of having almost like a PhD plus, I think, 5 or 6 years of research experience. So they were looking for like really big problems. And now when I look at the industry, I think data science is pretty synonymous with any other function, right? Most of the major tech companies or most of the major even upcoming startups already have a data science culture very early on. And it's become very common for industries or companies to have dedicated functions around data science, which is separated from analytics these days. Yeah. So it shows the power of how the things have been evolving in the space. And I had a first-hand, epiphany on really looking out for this particular growth. And I can confidently say this is just going to keep growing exponentially as things evolve, at least for the forward-looking decade. So hopefully all of you here are super excited for that future, and you see yourself playing a role there, and you envision a future where you can be part of this journey. Yeah. So let me pause here. If there are any questions, just let me know. Okay, I think there is one question: is SEO part of data analytics in web analytics? Yes, so SEO, SEM, other parts typically fall under the marketing side of things in most of the companies, but they are part of web analytics. I think the industry has slightly changed as well. Another point that I want to make here is most of the web analytics have now transitioned into app analytics. Yeah. So what happens is, when I remember this like 10 years ago, when Flipkart was still growing, they still used to be concentrated on the e-commerce website, which was like flipkart.com at that point. Yeah. So a lot of your web analytics, your SEO, your marketing, whether it's organic or paid, used to be structured around how do you get people in through your website. And Google Analytics was one of those solutions at that point, but there were like other Adobe solutions like Omniture, etc., which used to be super expensive for industry to adapt. But Flipkart being at that scale, they could afford it and they would go ahead and procure it. But now you will see most of the upcoming interaction has changed from purely being a web first approach to a more app first approach. Most of the companies, especially if you look at like ride hailing or food delivery, like that kind of a space, they've started with acquiring consumers who have a preference of starting their journey via an app, and they continue to do so. So there is a constant decline in either the mobile websites or the web versions. And over the last few years, in fact, very few companies want to even invest in an architecture solution which is primarily targeted on web. Yeah. So that's how at least I am seeing that web analytics changing into a more on the app analytics. I mean, the fundamentals still remain the same. It's just the nature of how the development has happened and how the users are interacting. So there's change in the patterns are very important, I feel, from an analytics point of view, to know them and to leverage them. Yeah. Okay, so let me move on and I think let me talk about some talking points here on what product analytics is and why I think this is an emerging field and how you can know more about it. So so the first part of product analytics is, it's a very natural question to ask, what exactly is product analytics? So think of product analytics, and I'll take an example here, right? Think of, let's say, either a Swiggy or an Ola in India, and think about what are they trying to do in terms of their product, right? They have multiple different apps there. So there you have the consumer facing app, they have a driver facing app, they have a merchant facing app, and in some instances they even have products which are rolled out for various B2B, you know, discussions or B2B players which they want to onboard, or they have any ops or ground staff where they want to provide good capabilities there, right? So product analytics primarily is about how do you make any product really better, and how do you ensure that data plays a central role in developing that. So imagine that Swiggy wants to launch a new feature, right? And let's say, and again, I'm taking Swiggy as an example because I believe the audience is more from the India side. So I just want to make sure that it's relevant. But you can substitute it with anything, right? You can substitute it with a Facebook, you can substitute it with a Grab, you can substitute it with an Apple, you can substitute it with an Amazon, right? When any of these companies are thinking about how to make change on their product, fundamentally, there are two sets of products which they are trying to work. One, what we refer to as 0 to 1 product, which is essentially starting completely new, right? So this could be something like, hey, uh, let's say Facebook wants to launch a messenger for the first time in India. In that case, it's a 0 to 1 example. Whereas, let's say Facebook is improving their feed, which is where most of us consume that information which Facebook is throwing at us. That's an example of 1 to 100, which means that the product has already, has a product market fit. There is a decent number of users there, and now you're trying to improve the experience. So the product analytics then essentially is all about how do you improve them? How do you improve this experience between launching a new product or refining an existing product? And how do you identify gaps in that offering? How do you size what kind of solutions you should intervene with? And how do you understand the impact of those interventions? Yeah. So essentially, if you look at it, there are three aspects of it. Just to reiterate that point, right? One is you're trying to understand what is the problem, or how big the problem is, or what are the facets of that problem. The second part is you're understanding the solution space, which you're trying to figure out, okay, what are the different pain points in this particular problem space, and what kind of an intervention can help. And the last part is essentially, once you've identified some solutions, how do you kind of validate that, right? So that's what a typical product analytics scope looks like. Is you're trying to understand right from going deeper into these problems, and throughout its journey trying to figure out where exactly the analytics can play a key role in driving that experience better. And of course, you have different nuances for different companies, but generally speaking, 0 to 1 products is more about, are you identifying that single use case or that multiple use cases which you think is going to resonate with a good product market fit, or which makes the product successful in the first instance. Yeah. Whereas for 1 to 100 products, you have sufficiently more data, you have a good user base. There it becomes, from an analytics perspective, more about how you can test new hypotheses and ideas at scale at a fast pace, so that you're able to understand from the data how things progress, and then be able to influence the decision making. Yeah. So that's what I want to talk about, what product analytics really means here. And if you look at the companies, right, almost all the upcoming tech companies have a dedicated team of product managers. They have product designers, they have engineering teams. And in the last 5 years or so, they also have dedicated product analytics team. Now, analytics and data science is something, is used more interchangeably in the industry, and every company has a different way of tagging it. Some companies want to keep them very separate, where they say that, hey, data science still sits with the engineering teams. It's more about developing production level models and implementing it, whereas they want to keep analytics separate in understanding the space better and understanding the impact of the interventions. Whereas a lot of other companies kind of club them together. They say, hey, there's no differentiation. Everyone is going to be called data scientist. So these words are interchangeable, but you can get a sense that whether it's analytics or data science, these days the trend is very different. You will see almost, when a new startup is being formed, uh, typically in the olden days, they would look for, hey, CEOs or founders play the role of a product manager. They would hire designers and engineering upfront, and they will only look for analytics when there is a good amount of scale reached, and it's almost like, once they have achieved a high amount of scale, that they find adding that function relevant. But these days, because a lot of startups are more focused towards be able to launch things very fast, and with the whole architecture in the industry changing it, you will see that analytics is now coming more and more at central of the decision making, and ensuring that even in 0 to 1 products, they kind of go very deep in taking a strategic role on how the overall product roadmap is shaped. Yeah. So that's what I mean about product analytics here. Now, how is the product analytics different from others? Is typically, analytics could be classified depending on the domain you are working. So you can have, let's say, supply chain analytics, you can have business analytics, you can have web analytics, you can have product analytics, you can have, you name the function you are working with, marketing analytics or operation analytics. So product analytics refers to essentially working with the tech teams, largely product and engineering teams, and then you are able to understand how the solutions of the problem space, and how do you kind of take the data to make a better product. Yeah. If you look at a product life cycle, there are multiple journeys through which, uh, which you need to understand how a company works, and every company is different in that sense. So if I take example of Grab, which is essentially my current company, I think the product life cycle could be anywhere from a few weeks to a few months, depending on what sort of product you're developing. Yeah, and there we have a lot of emphasis on collecting the data upfront, ensuring that we are sizing the solutions for any specific problem, go deep into our existing database and figure out the insights and understand the user patterns, right? And then comes the next part, which is a game changer, according to me, is the experimentation. So experimentation is where I have seen product analytics being fundamentally very different from all the other ones, because one of the really, a wonder of the tech world these days is essentially how fast are you able to experiment, and what is, as an organization, your muscle on testing multiple new ideas. So again, taking an example, if you look 10 years back, right, it used to be super costly for a company to try out a new idea. So and it was important for them to ensure that that idea had a pretty high rate of success. So there was a lot of decision, especially opinion based decisions, were made before they were able to implement any solution. So a lot of time would be, let's say, spent in figuring out what exactly do they need to do, and reducing their choices based on based on individuals' opinions. Whereas now the landscape has completely changed. Now even smallest of decisions, like, hey, which color you want to kind of show on your any screen, what kind of font you want to select, do you want to show, for example, let's say in case of Ola, do you want to show ETA in minutes or seconds? Do you want to show ETA as a single value or range? Do you want to show ETA combined with distance, or you want to show just the ETA, right? So ETA here is essentially the time estimate which they're trying to show when a driver is going to come and pick you up, or drop off time. Yeah. So everything these days can be measured through experimentation, and product analytics plays a crucial role in enabling that for any organization. Yeah. How are you able to validate different hypotheses? How are you able to test a large number of hypotheses? And how are you able to ensure that that experimentation muscle is built and in turn converted into launching the more effective solutions? I think that's how the industry is progressing, and it's an important skill set if you're aspiring a career in this space, for all of you to kind of get a grasp on how things work there. Yeah. So experimentation to me is like central in any product analytics role these days. So you can even validate this. You can pick up, let's say, Facebook openings. You can pick up Apple openings. You can pick up Amazon. You can pick up Flipkart or any other company for that matter. And if you come across any product analytics or any similar set of roles, you will see a lot of emphasis on talking about your ability to be able to understand how experimentation works in an industry settings and how you're able to kind of understand and leverage that. Yeah. So that remains a very crucial I guess muscle for product analyst. And as I mentioned, that the industry is really changing at a rapid pace, and you will see at any point companies running upwards of tens of thousands of experiments in parallel, and be able to measure the smallest impact of their product interventions, and hence keep optimizing their experience for a variety of customers. Yeah. The next point is essentially, I think I briefly touched about it, but the difference between product analyst or product analytics versus the rest of it fundamentally is about this ability for you to be very closely associated with the tech stack of a company, or understand their product strategy and play a central role in it, right? Most of these companies now, the product analytics hierarchy runs all the way. They're considered like the product analytics leaders are considered on the same plane as product managers or designers or engineers. And most of these companies have the leadership positions for these functions, so that you play a critical role as you grow along in this career in shaping the overall product and tech strategy. That's how critical the product analytics is becoming. And that's why, to me, it is fundamentally for any of you who wants to be closer to the product side of things and understand how you can influence a product strategy while be connected with your data roots. It's like a perfect function which helps you in enabling that. Most of the other analytics, which is, let's say, marketing or business or operational or supply chain, is very connected to that domain, which tends to be not as involved in tech as the product analytics is. Yeah. I think I saw someone raising hand. Do you want to share your question? Pranay, would you know if someone raised hand or anyone has a question?
I think so. It's
Okay.
by mistake. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Okay. So that's what, like, as we're talking about why product analytics is important, is you're part of the tech strategy now. You're part of figuring out what exactly the company is anticipated to roll out in terms of their product long-term roadmap, and then you play a critical role as a leader if you're able to progress in this career and influence that. Yeah, it's no longer about just being a data expert or being a functional expert. It's also about essentially understanding the space better on product strategy and be able to figure out which way you need to steer your company or your large product discussions and how you should approach this. Yeah. And this is something, growing importance of product analytics is becoming more and more prominent across different sectors and across different industries, in fact, across different geographies. Yeah. If you look at a company like Meta or Facebook, right, and you can see how they position analytics or product analytics as a key part of their overall product development. At Grab, where I work, I think we have, I can tell you from my experience that for example, in my role, play a critical role in defining the strategy for the product functions I'm, interacting with. Similarly, I think when I talk to my peers in Flipkart or when I talk to my peers in Swiggy, it's pretty much the same setup that everywhere you see day by day, week by week, month by month, the importance of product analytics continue to be continue to be harnessed by the founders, by the CTOs, by the CPOs. And I definitely see, in a more and more companies actually creating a separate function and separate C level functions for product analytics. Yeah, I mean it's still in the trend. You may not find that relevant roles now, but just imagine 5 years, 10 years down the lane that you will specifically see roles like head of product analytics, or almost like a chief product analytics officer. It could be combined with other analytics functions, so not necessarily product analytics, but you will have chief analytics officers or chief data officers or chief information officers, and you will see a lot more such positions being created, right? And that's where I see, if you are someone who is very interested in being part of the tech side, and if you want to understand how the strategy and how things work there, product analytics is actually a great function to start with, right? The other big advantage of product analytics, which I've seen, is I think I've seen countless examples of people starting their career in product analytics and then moving to a more larger role on product manager or being a product leader, or being the overall sponsor for a big initiative. Yeah, so it's also serving as a great stepping stone for folks to leverage their analytics / data skill sets and moving to a function which is primarily considered, product manager is typically considered that role which is very critical in figuring out how to get different aspects of tech and and coordinating with the business / op stakeholders and ensuring that the company essentially moves forward. Yeah. So that's where product analytics again plays the crucial role, is becomes a great stepping stone. And in itself, I think in the next few years, it's going to stand alone, and it's going to roll up to almost a C level or a C-1 level kind of impact. Yeah. Okay, so there's a very important question from Tushar. I think he's asking, what are the steps or activities are performed as part of product analytics? Yeah, so I think let me try and answer that, Tushar. Essentially, when you look at product analytics, right, like, and I'll fairly talk about folks who are working on this on a slightly more IC level. They need to ensure that they are able to understand what exactly is the product vision. So let's say, let's break it down for a company like Grab, right? So right now, Grab, as some of you might know, it's one of the super apps in the Southeast Asia space, and it's one of the leading super apps in the Southeast Asia space. So let's say I'll just break it down. So right now we have, let's say, a mobility, which is ride sharing, then we have food delivery, then we have financial services. Now you can imagine that if you go deeper, let's say in space of food delivery, there is a product group which is focused on improving that overall experience of consumer app, and how do you ensure that consumers are able to find the food, consumers are able to search for the restaurant, their ratings, and so on, right? So as a product analyst, you are involved in, let's say, part of that particular team. Your day-to-day job entails that you have a good understanding of the overall journey of the data. So in the sense that the basics of how the databases are maintained, where exactly the data lakes are, how do you process it. But you also need to own something which is different from others, is you also need to own the data generation part. So what do I mean by that is you're also responsible in most of the companies that every time a new feature is launched, it's your responsibility to know what additional data should be collected or could be collected, and how do you kind of enable that, right? So once you are there, let's say a new product is launched, you have identified the key success metrics, you realize that, hey, there are certain missing gaps, then you need to work with product and engineering teams in getting that information there, right? So that's like the first step which you need is, hey, are you able to get that data? And if you don't have the data, what does it entail, right? And that itself is super complicated. So by no means instrumentation or overall web tracking or app tracking is easy. I think there are multiple solutions out there. Each company has its own set of practices, but it's super important and super critical that you understand how the data collection works there. Yeah? The next part comes is once you have that, let's say the product moves to the next stage is, hey, you have identified a problem. Now you're brainstorming with the product managers, with the designers, with the engineers, with other data scientists, or any other functions involved in figuring out what sort of solution you can explore. So once they have a list of hypotheses, typically they will come to a product analyst and say, can you take these different solutions and size what could be the impact generated from each of the solutions? And this is where your understanding of the data and understanding of the of the business context or the product context helps in figuring out what sort of an estimate you need to make on how do you rank the importance of these interventions, right? And to do that, again, you can continue to do your traditional analytics by going deeper and figuring out correlations, figuring out causations. In some cases, you might even need to understand things better by building out your own machine learning models. And once you have that, then you move. Let's say you have identified a solution there. Then you move to the next step, which is all about figuring out. Okay, you have a thesis, as a team, that this is the intervention you want to do, and you think this intervention is going to probably achieve an outcome X. So it becomes super important now for you to become very statistical in that nature of understanding how hypothesis testing works and how experimentation works. That's where you need to define, okay, what are the success metric? What exactly this particular experiment is going to measure? In most of the companies, they use experimentation as a way of causation to figure out if this particular intervention is going to help or not help, or what are the downsides or upsides of it. And once you go there, you run this experiment. And again, experiment setup is not easy. You need to figure out the experiment design, how long you want to run the experiment, what are the challenges associated with it, how does your experimentation architecture supports, work with engineering, data engineering, right? So I'm oversimplifying some of these processes, but in reality, they are super complicated and it takes you weeks just to figure this out. Once you understand your experiment strategy for that particular intervention, then you go to the next step, which is actually running the experiment. And once you run the experiment, then you need to do a deep dive to figure out what exactly happened. If the intervention performed as you expected, then what were the reasons for it? If it did not perform, then what were the reasons of it? So that you can give this feedback to the overall product loop and figure out, okay, did your original hypothesis, was validated, or have you learned something new? And do you now want to iterate on this solution, or do you want to, move on to your list and try the next idea there to figure out how to solve for this problem? Yeah. So that's what, at least in my, in my essence, what are the different activities which a product analytics needs to do. Yeah. Okay, a quick time check. So it's 1:03. So I'll move to the next part, which is more about, this is slightly more practical in terms of what I think, could be a few pointers or few way you can think about how to be successful in product analytics, right? So the number one for me is the basics. Essentially, I think this is true for any analytics role. You need to have a good understanding of your technical skills, whether it's data processing or data analyzing. With an exception in product analytics, that I think you need to be good and have a good knack of instrumentation as well. So instrumentation essentially is how do you collect the data? How do you understand that work? Yeah. And most of these skill sets are fairly, transferable to any other analytics data science role. So these should be something, if you're not good at it, or if you are, starting a new career in this field, something you should take it as a given, because without having these, you will not be able to essentially be an independent, strong contributor and not able to progress, right? So once you have identified that, hey, and these could be different. So when I say technical skills, it could be how do you process data? Different companies have different preferences, but what I have seen more or less is at early stages of your career, it depends on where you started and what was the industry trend. For example, when I started, SQL used to be the the sole language which we used to use for processing the data. But now I see a lot of new joiners want to start only with Python, right? And Python is becoming far more adopted in the industry. A lot of people have different preferences. They even have, sometimes want to use R, or sometimes they want to use a combination of different tools or different languages here, right? So I do think on data processing side, if you know one language good, I think it's essentially you understand the building blocks behind it, and you can transfer into learning any of the other skills. And there are plethora of online courses there. There are plethora of different platforms which can help you in practicing and honing the skills, right? The second part, which I think is more important and which is connected to the what I would say data analyzing, is this is where I think it matters a lot on your ability to identify what I call is actionable insights and recommendation. Essentially, this is where I think it separates you from a great analyst to a good analyst, is your ability and knack to identify what exactly do you recommend and what exactly are the insights you are able to generate. A lot of people are really good at processing the data and understanding what's going on, but very few people are able to convert that into meaningful recommendations, which the rest of the product or engineering team can actually take forward and implement. And this is where I think some amount of exposure here, some amount of understanding of what the product is trying to do, the strategy behind it, I think will help you in being a great analyst, right? The third part comes is on the experimentation. I think I talked about it in my previous slide, but essentially, if you're not new to it, or if you don't have any idea what experimentation means, I've broke it down in my head into two ways. One is all about the theoretical knowledge, right? So read more about hypothesis testing, what happens there, how do you validate an null hypothesis, an alternate hypothesis, what are the statistical significance, when do you use a certain amount of test like a t-test versus when do you use something else, right? How does the sample sizing works, what are the complexity around it, and so on. So this is very theoretical. Again, I think depending on the courses you have enrolled, depending on the platforms you're looking for, there are good enough courses out there where you can learn this on your own or as part of the curriculum which you guys are enrolled into. The second part is where I feel again there is a big gap between a great product analyst and a so-so or not so good or good product analyst, is essentially, are you able to understand how does this works in an industry or practical setting? So every company, as I mentioned, is different, and there is a huge cost of experimentation. So what I mean by this is, when you go to experiment stage, typically in a company, there is a fair bit of product development which engineering teams have to invest in developing that idea. Yeah. So you need to be cognizant of the fact that how is that cost and how much have they invested in versus what are you trying to measure? Yeah. And how can you be smart about reducing that cost of experimentation for your organization? And how do you lower your barrier to entry of trying out new things, which is where essentially you need to really understand the power of experimentation and how can you enable, for example, testing multiple hypotheses in a single experiment. For example, how do you move from testing A/B experiments to, let's say, A/B/C/D, multiple variants there, and so on, right? And the second matter is the practical significance of any experiment, right? A lot of times you will see companies talking about this intervention. Even if it's successful, it needs to be successful by a decent margin for them to even consider rolling that feature out. So that's what I mean by practical significance here. But I think just read more about this space. I think you will get a fair understanding of how companies typically think, on these aspects. Yeah. And the last to me comes in a lower priority, and this is more important as you scale up or as you grow vertically up in this space, is your understanding of product strategy. So are you able to understand clearly what the product roadmap is trying to do and understand the product life cycle of the teams you are part of? That makes it super important for you to understand where do you need to focus as an analytics leader or as an IC, that where exactly do you need to dig deep and find that relevant insight or find or validate that relevant hypothesis. Yeah. So yeah, again, this is no right or wrong way, but this is just what I have learned over the last few years, that successful analysts, or when I've seen friends and colleagues which have grown significantly in the space, they were able to demonstrate these four things consistently to be really good at this particular space, right? So they have a very good, strong knack of data, right? They are able to process the data, they are able to understand the shifts in the industry, they are able to switch from various languages and be really able to, invest their time in training and retraining their technical skills. And then they are able to use those skills to generate fantastic recommendations. And experimentation continues to evolve for every organization, and the complexity introduced is grows multiple fold every few years. So they're able to kind of keep pace with it. And as you take more leadership, or as you take more managerial roles, I think understanding of product strategy plays a good role. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I think that's what I wanted to just give a brief introduction to product analytics to all of you. Hopefully you find this helpful. Hopefully you're finding this connection to what I am saying. I'll move to the next part, which is an open-ended Q&A. So I think Pranay or maybe someone can take the questions and let me know if you have it here.
Yeah, Ankush, it was a really great session, and like we understood really like ins and out of how a product is developed, the product cycle and all, the KPIs we need to set for the product and all. So guys, if you have any question, you can put in the chat window. So we have two questions currently. I like to start the first question. From a product analytics side, what do you think makes a product a good market fit? Is it the customer, like consumer demand, or the problem that the product is solving? Which side there is more weight?
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a great question, right? So if you talk about the product market fit, it's so essentially what are you trying to validate in this stage of product life cycle, right? You think you have a product, you think you have an hypothesis of what your customers want, right? So let me take an example that, let's say Swiggy wants to launch a driver navigation product in India, right? So this is essentially, they have this hypothesis that they want to ensure that they're providing better routes and better guidance to their drivers than any of the existing solutions. And they have a validation that, we have several advantages over existing options there. Now, this is all done theoretically. This is all done, in your market research, or in your planning, or in your strategy discussions. The product market fit then refers to how do you identify what exactly will connect with your end consumers there, right? So in this case, let's say the drivers are looking for, let's say, 5 different things. They want to know, for example, a very clear way of identifying multiple routes. So let's say from point A to point B, the drivers don't prefer Swiggy recommending them a specific route, but rather 5 different routes. So that's what they want, right? So when you are in the product market fit stage, what is important for you to realize is what will it take for you to tweak your product in a way that customers are able to resonate, or customers are able to try and give you feedback that, hey, these are the things which are working and these are the things which are not working, right? A lot of it from an analytics point of view relies on how do you see people actually using your product. So there are different ways you can gather this information. One is you can just straight away ask them, right? The other is you can check their data patterns, right? Something which I would generally encourage everyone is look at if folks are coming back to your product, right? Let's say a driver in this case has used the navigation, and although they say that, hey, everything is well, look at specifically if the driver is using that navigation every time the driver is delivering, because almost everyone needs to have some sort of the other navigation app, right? And are they able to switch from, let's say, a different provider to what you're launching? So this is where it matters is 2 things. One is primarily adoption, right? Adoption and repeat rate matters a lot at this stage versus the overall experience, because in a product market fit, stage, you are essentially trying to first validate if this product even has a fit in the market. If you have a successful understanding that yes, there are good enough people out there who are going to consume this product, next stage comes is how you essentially refine the experience. Yeah. So hopefully this gives some clarity over how to think about product market fit and how product analytics can help in measuring that. Yeah.
Yeah, very nice. So adding to this question, like what do you think, like is there a difference between the hypothesis you're testing and the metric for the good like the product market fit? Like is it different or is similar?
So I mean, so what you are testing, so something which you ideally there should not be a difference, right? Ideally, if you have designed a perfect way, then you should identify those metrics which are measurable and which are actionable.
Okay.
Right? I mean, why I'm stressing on these two things is a lot of times you will see that folks are able to identify the metric, but they don't know what that metric is supposed to do, or they don't know what to do next. So for example, if at a product market fit, you go and ask something like NPS, right? And ask people, are you going to recommend it or not? It's not going to help you in improving your product, because either they're going to say yes or no, right? And you might have some baseline and you want to track it over time to see if the people are actually happy or not. But at that stage, you are more looking for feedbacks on figuring out how do you tailor your product so that it is actually, the users are finding more valuable. So to me, it is like if you're able to identify the right metric, which is more actionable, as well as providing you with the right level of insights, I think then you can solve and achieve both the objectives.
Yeah, really good answer. Like there's one more question. Any good books or like website you can recommend, please? It's for Rajiv. Yeah.
Yes. So I think I can maybe share with the organizers a bit later. I think there are a few good ones out there. Generally, I would say if you are looking to understand more about, on the experimentation part, there is a famous experiment strategy book. I think I have it here. It's called Online A/B Experiments. I think I'll ping the exact title, maybe Pranay to you, and then you can pass on to the rest of the group. Yeah. So that's one. Definitely, I will talk about the power of experimentation. I think it talks about how it is essentially a consolidated kind of like from various different industry leaders, right? It talks about how all these companies have been doing and how they have been able to measure smallest of things, and how you should think about it, right? So that's one. Second is, I would generally say that if you're interested in any company, look at their company blogs. They do talk about real life, how they are experimenting. So for example, if you're interested in Grab, go and look at the Grab's blogs. If you're interested in Uber, Uber has their own blogs around experimentation or product analytics. Similarly, you will see Booking.com, Airbnb, like all the the major players do talk a lot about what they are doing, and I think they are like great first information for you to understand, and they regularly update that as well.
Yeah, cool. So the next question is by Richa. Any example where customer reviews help in product analytics cycle?
Yes. So customer reviews play a very crucial role, right? In essentially understanding how things happen. So I'll give you an example here, right? I think most of you might be familiar now that the general behavior in the industry, if you ask customers to rate, like whether it's any experience. So let's say you reached out to your credit card, customer care. You reached out to your at the end of a trip, if an Ola or a Swiggy is asking you to rate, or if you have bought a product from Apple or Amazon or Flipkart and they ask you to send a survey, right? A lot of times you will see a common pattern is customer tends to only rate when they are very grieving experience, right? I mean, this is like for more transactional things. But if you look at more travel related like Agoda or Booking.com, there you will find very different sort of reviews. Yeah. So if I talk the former example, if you keep an eye on this metric and every time you're making a product intervention, and if you think you are worsening this metric, that means something is going wrong, right? Because it's very difficult for customers to in case of, let's say, if I talk about Grab's example, whether it's food delivery or whether it's ride hailing, right? A lot of time customers don't necessarily give you a 5-star, but if you screw up, they are going to give you a 1-star, right? So you will see a very disproportionate amount of ratings. And that actually helps because you are protecting your downside. So next time you launch a new feature, and if you realize, hey, that feature is not really doing well, this metric actually becomes, your one of the guardrails which you want to keep while designing any experiment or while designing any intervention to ensure that you're not worsening this off. So that's that, at least like one direct way I generally see us using customer ratings and reviews for measuring any of the product interventions. Yeah.
So the next question is, there is always a gap between the product analytics in training, theory, and real time. So if you can talk about more about the expectation from a company side, how are we bridging those gaps, like the theory product analytics and the real time product analytics?
Yeah, as I was saying earlier, that in theory, things might, as I said, right, when you read about hypothesis testing, when you read about data processing, where you read about experimentation, where you read about product lifecycle, you might find it very, very ideal. Yeah, you might find it. Most of them are assuming a perfect world out there and assuming a lot of things just available, right? If you look at in theory, for example, right, when you run any sort of product interventions, it is linked. Like you're not creating a company out of a scratch every time, or you're not trying a groundbreaking idea every time. Whenever you're trying to make a change, it does have an impact practically on other products or other features. And how do you manage that interlinking, right? So for example, in let's take that you want to run an experiment on improving a certain aspect, and you think that this is the problem this is trying to solve. So let's say that you do a market research and you figure out that customers care more for distance than time, right? And you figure out that, hey, instead of showing how far a food delivery rider in terms of time, we want to show a distance, and you do that, right? From a and let's say your objective metric here was customer reviews, and you think that, hey, if more people are rating us positively after this change, we are making a good good decision on this. But what most likely will happen is this metric is going to have an impact on a lot of other things. It will have an impact on your long-term retention. It will have an impact on your immediate conversion. It will have an impact on even what sort of selections they are making in terms of restaurants. So a lot of things could change dynamically in an industry setting, which is going to be very difficult for you to know when you're reading practically, or when you're doing any theoretical course, or when you're just reading a book, right? Which is where I think you will have to adjust. You will have to figure out what are the trade-offs. You have to understand the DNA of the company on what are the things that are okay for you to consider, which works in that particular role or that particular company. Yeah. So I think I don't know if I've answered that question exactly, but I do think there is a huge difference between what you learn theoretically and what you have a more practical experience of product analytics, or in general for most of the analytics stuff out there. It's how do I put it? Like in a company space, what matters is, are you able to give actionable, or are you able to make that project move ahead? Right? That is what matters. It doesn't really matter what technique you use. It doesn't really matter if you have used Python or SQL. It doesn't really matter, if you're using a linear regression or a complicated machine learning model. Ultimately, for most of the product leaders and business leaders, what matters is, are you able to tell them what exactly is the next big idea they need to do, or are you able to tell them precisely how their intervention is performed? That is, to me, the crux of figuring out the difference between an industry setting versus a more theoretical setting. Yeah,
Kind of more about experimentation in in a practical way here.
Yeah.
So Girish asks, what are the industry best practice for product analytics space, consider geography, industry sector, and demography, etc.?
Yeah, I think as industry best practices, let me take a stab at this. Can you just like maybe Girish, if you're there, can you just talk me like what do you mean by best practices in terms of like the tools you're talking about, in terms of the techniques, or in terms of the process, so that I can touch on
Let
that.
me try if I can like allow him to speak. Girish, you can talk. I think allowed to talk.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, Ankush. Thanks. Very well presentation. What I was trying to understand was, is there any best practices, industry best practices on how you go about, product analytics, considering the sector, geographies, and also demographics? Because, a product which is very well adopted in a US market may have to have a very different approach in Indian market, right? And also the technology, the internet penetration. So for example, if the internet access is really good in US or Singapore, in India, in remote areas, that product may not be able to work well if it requires internet connection always. So that's what I was trying to kind of gauge.
Yeah, I think generally, I think Girish, I don't know about the wider industry, because I don't think there is like easy way to access this information. But what I can tell you, is, if a product is successful to your specific question, let's say in a market like US, it is not a guarantee that it will success everywhere, right? So you can look for examples like Netflix, and if you look at the streaming space, right? And your question then becomes very pertaining that look at how Netflix or Amazon Prime or some of the other global streaming players are trying to customize their offerings in India, right? From a product perspective, those typically, if you look in US or if you look at more developed markets, you will see a lot of HD version being adopted by people, because that's how they're consuming their content. They're primarily sitting in their couch and they are viewing in the large screens. Whereas if you look in India, and this is my understanding, is a lot of the consumption is just happening on a mobile phone, right? A lot of people want to consume it while they are sitting at home or while they are traveling. And there it becomes a completely different aspect for them to measure on figuring out what exactly do they need to tweak, right? They're not, they need to essentially ensure that the bandwidth consumed is as low as possible, so that the people are able to have a decent quality. So there the trade-off is very different. They're not looking for optimizing for a very, a very high grade quality content, and then the teams are focusing on it, but rather they are figuring out on how do you ensure that you're able to load things on a specific time slot. So for example, in most of the other markets, they would just load the whole episode upfront because they know internet bandwidth is not an issue. Whereas in a market like India, especially in a rural context, right, they would want to tweak on some of those performance and play a critical role. Even product analytics there will play a critical role in understanding how the crash rate is, how the latency is, and focus on those aspects, because those are like fundamental in terms of figuring out if the buffering is happening, if people are able to find the content which they are looking for. Yeah. So that's how, at least I would see that, when you are launching out a product out there, be very careful what you're going to measure for different markets, because you need to have an understanding of how that product is consumed at a different geographies or different, demographies. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Girish. Thank you, Ankush. The next question is, like, sometimes changes are suggested by the customer, like while developing the product. So how would you deal with those like situations? Like, does it affect your cost and resources?
Yeah, I think this is good. So the way I'll think about it is, you can think of B2C versus B2B. In a B2C context, you have a lot more understanding of what the customers want, right? Whether they're giving you the feedback, whether you're talking to them. And if you think there is a wide variety of customers going to be interested in that, you should definitely incorporate that. Once, let's say you have a list of, let's say, top 5 features which you think customers are asking for, then you go about figuring out the cost of implementation of it, the practical feasibility of it, how long do you take to develop it, etc. And then you can develop a framework to kind of prioritize. So B2C setting, I think it's fairly easy because you can ask the customers and you can get. B2B setting is where things get more difficult, right? If a customer is asking for a feature, a lot of times it depends on the situational, right? if you have, let's say, one large customer, and if they are requesting for a specific feature, and if you're not able to deliver, you are going to potentially risk losing them. And as a company, then it matters a lot, because then you're going to lose your revenue and so on others. So in a B2B context, generally, my sense is the customization which you need for every product is very high. You need to support when you are, when you're going to GTM, which is going to different companies. Everyone has a different understanding and the requirements. It's very difficult to, provide one solution which fits for all, especially if you're a niche player, right? And that's how they kind of do it, that they are trying to gather this information from each of the customers, and depending on what they can build and how important that client is, they're going to tweak it. Yeah.
The next question is, how would you derive the null hypothesis and its alternative form? Is it based on the customer requirement?
No. So null hypothesis and alternate, it's a very important question. Null hypothesis, alternate hypothesis should be purely, as theoretical as you can make. So for example, if you think that providing shorter ETAs is gonna lead to a higher conversion, right? So let's say you show a customer 5 minutes and you show another customer 10 minutes, and you think the customer who sees 5 minutes more likely is going to convert on your website. Like you can change this. You can change this in various scenarios. You can pick, let's say, any logistics services that deliver in 5 days versus 1 day, what happens, and you can keep trying that out. Customer tells you the problem. Customer is not going to tell you the exact hypothesis. This is where you need to decide that what is my null hypothesis, what is alternate. Typically, the null hypothesis is your default version that your intervention will not help. So your null hypothesis generally is about that you're maintaining the status quo. Nothing is changing because of your intervention. Your alternate hypothesis, essentially, which is where you reject the null hypothesis, is you're making that experience better, right? If your findings are completely in the opposite direction, that you're actually making worse, I think then it's an easy decision that you have to roll it back and you have to figure out what else you need to do. But customers, if you go ask and say, hey, give us the null and alternate hypothesis, they won't know anything about it, and you're not going to go anywhere. So critical for you to think null and alternate hypothesis from this perspective.
Yeah, great insight, Ankush. If somebody have any more question, and if they want to connect to you, how they do that? Like, do you have any?
Yeah, I think sure. You can just ping me on my LinkedIn. I think I think I've shared that with I think Pranoy and Akanksha and others. So maybe you can just ping me on a LinkedIn chat, and I'm happy to respond to you. Otherwise, I'll also pass on my email address, non-office email address, to the organizers, and they can pass it on to you, and you can write to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ankush. Guys, do you have any more questions? Yeah, Pranay has shared the link, Ankush LinkedIn account then. Okay, moving on to our last question, I think it's by Supriya. How do you analyze the product is nice or like great or nice? Is it defined by the business or analyzed by the product analyst?
Yeah, I think it's honestly a very subjective question if you want to classify whether it's great, good, or bad. Generally, what happens is you have some objectives, right? And you're measuring any intervention against that objective. So, but it's not a hard and fast rule. So, for example, if you think you're launching a product in a new city, and if you think getting X thousand MAUs is what you would consider as a great success, and anything about that will be like astonishing, but anything like very low on hundreds or that kind of level is kind of very poor, then you have a very objective way of defining that, hey, what happens is there, right? But one thing which I want to call out here is, as a product analyst, it is good for us to be super objective, that before a product is launched, you are, you're there.
Ankush, I think Priya is telling me that it's not product nice, but it's product niche. Sorry.
Oh, okay. How to analyze the product niche? Is it defined by business? Okay. Sorry. Product niche, you mean, okay. I get the question now. No, I think product niche is it's essentially, if you are figuring out if you want to go down that level of your product's life cycle, where you think the mass customizations or mass changes have already happened. So So to give you an example, typically, logically, what makes sense is you want to roll out features or you want to make changes in your experience, which is going to target to majority or at least vast, vast majority of the population. So for example, let's say you have 5 different experiences you want to improve on your product, right? And you decide that the top 2 have the most reach. That means they're covering, let's say 30-40%, or maybe a much more larger population which has requested for this, or you think is going to help them. Typically it's better because you are able to then solve for the problems which are bigger and which are going to have a higher impact first, then you go towards the niche. But sometimes the business can come back, or sometimes you might think that, hey, the niche are your top paying customers or your highly valued customers, or niche are your customer group which is going to give you more overall impact. So the way I would think about it as an objective framework to think about on this is, does focusing on niche give you a larger benefit as an organization, or does focusing on the mass interventions give you a larger benefit? And benefit here could be very objective metric. It could be MAUs, it could be profitability, it could be retention, it could be any of those standard measures. And then you can compare against what happens with various interventions. And if niche is the answer, then you go for it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ankush. Guys, before closing the session, we have a feedback form rolled out. Please try to fill that so that we can host similar session in the coming future. Fine. I asked Pranay to please share the link. Okay, thank you so much. There is one more last question by Mohammed. What coding is best for data analytics in the coming years? I think Ankush has really explained that question.
Yeah, I think Mohammed, I think just start, if you're starting new, start with SQL, move on to Python. If you can directly start with Python, go for it, right? And I'm sure 10 years later something new might come up, so you should fairly feel confident. Look, fundamentally things are more about structuring or unstructured data and how you're able to process it so that you're able to get insights from it. Yeah.
I think Ajay has posted something in the Q&A section. If I'm not wrong, previously customer means where I don't know how to read this.
Yeah, I can read that. No worries.
Okay.
If I'm not wrong, previously customer means कष्ट से जो मर जाता है वो होता है customer. Nowadays, customer is looking because of awareness, availability of multiple options. Hence, customer reviews are of utmost importance in product cycle. Yeah, I think completely agree with your viewpoint, Ajay. Here is whatever customer views they are able to articulate very well these days. Whether it's social media, whether it's your app ratings, whether it's your feedback, and most likely you need to ensure that your product is able to help those customers and not really frustrate them. Yeah.
I think feedback, the sanity of the feedback also is very important, because the quality feedback is very important. If you're developing some product,
Definitely.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ankush, for tuning in today and hosting this very wonderful session about product and all. Guys, do you have any more last question, or we can end the session? Okay. No more question, I think. Yeah.
Thank you everyone. Thank you for the organizers to bring me here. I hope at least all of you find something valuable here, and are able to I was able to enhance your understanding of this industry and of this space. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ankush. We might terminate the session now. We may. Thank you so much.